Hello my beautiful watchers. I'm taking a quick break from all things vampire because unfortunately my throat issues slowed down production on the last two projects so much I ran out of time to get to Queen of the Damned before the end of the month, but don't worry, that mess of an adaptation is still coming soon. In the meantime, I thought perhaps I could just take a second to look back at everything I've covered so far and reflect on the best and worst examples of attempts to successfully adapt a book into a feature film. And of course, I had to make it into a top 10 list because YouTube. I suppose I probably should explain my criteria for what I consider makes an adaptation good or bad before we jump in. Since my revelation that word-for-word accuracy isn't the be-all and end-all of film adaptations, trying to figure out exactly what does matter could take up an entire video all to itself, and probably will someday soon. But for now, the simplest way to say this is I'm going to be judging this list based on plot accuracy, loyalty to the original themes, and how skillfully these two things were converted and adapted to fit the new medium of moving pictures. I am sticking with the philosophy for now that a film's overall merit isn't super relevant, as the quality of a film is dependent on way more than just the things that tie into the book. Directing, lighting, framing, scoring, acting, editing, and general cinematography can all result in a bad adaptation being a great film, and vice versa. This is not the only way to judge adaptations, but it is the way I'm going with right now. So it's not just all positivity then all negativity. I'm going to alternate between the two categories as I work my way to the top. Do remember that this is just about the adaptations I've reviewed in the past, not every film based on a book in the world. Okay, let's do this. Number 10 on the good adaptations list, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. A very solid attempt that definitely scratched the surface of what the graphic novels were about on a fundamental level, and one of my favourite movies of all time, but still, attempting to cram the plot of 6 books, one of which hadn't even been written yet, into one movie was never going to end with a phenomenal spot on this list. I maintain that it deserves at least the bottom rung though, because of just how well they handled the stuff that they did manage to fit in from the books. And number 10 on the not so good list, the Hobbit Trilogy. Not disloyal enough to the plot to put it higher up on the list, but it's still worth mentioning for the millionth time on YouTube what a catastrophic mistake it was to stretch it out over 3 long films, and an even bigger misstep to try to force the tone of the Lord of the Rings onto a story that was not meant for it. We could have had something different but good, but instead we got yet another shameless attempt to monetize our nostalgia. The number 9 spot on the best list goes to... It's the 50 Shades trilogy, okay? I know, it physically hurt me to put this on any list that had the word best in it. These are deeply unpleasant movies based on shockingly bad books, but they managed to stay very close to what was meant to be the plot while doing their best to make up for the author's incompetence and make it in some way understandable, and I have to acknowledge that. I said this in the episodes, I feel pity for them for being so attuned with the books. They would have made much better movies if they'd been allowed to veer further away from them. They polished the hell out of E.L. James's turd. The end result was a shiny turd, but I can't deny that it was E.L. James's turd up there on the big screen. Well, fucking done. And in 9th place on the opposing team, Blood and Chocolate. You would think that having little to nothing in common with the source material would be a positive thing when I didn't really care for the book. It had a lot of bad messages regarding teenage behaviour, consent, and possibly being accidentally anti-race mixing, but gosh damn, the film actually managed to outdo it in being problematic, unlikable, and just plain dumb. What really earned it a place on this list though was their seemingly pointless decision to make all of the bad guys of the book good, all of the good guys bad, and making people who are having sex mother and son now. Ugh. My number 8 positive pick goes to Watchmen. I know a lot of people have serious and legitimate issues with Watchmen and Zack Snyder's decisions when it comes to comic book adaptations. And I know that some people think that the squid was absolutely essential, even if I think that's less legitimate to be completely honest. But come on, like everything else in this film clearly shows that he used the graphic novel as a storyboard. Snyder went above and beyond what most directors would consider reasonable book loyalty. I also think he did a decent job at trimming down the not strictly necessary parts of the graphic novel to let him really focus on and do justice to the key parts of the story, and he deserves some props for that. And number 8 in the negative corner, Starship Troopers. Just focusing on the what and not the why in my pilot episode of Lost in Adaptation was a mistake that I do plan to correct someday, but for now suffice to say that the film was intentionally different from the book and actively mocked the ideology of its source material in places. A rare example of a bad adaptation by design. 7th place on the winning team goes to The Princess Bride. It is so delightfully apt that this film just used the good bits from the book and left out the framing device because that framing device was literally about abridging a story to only include the good bits. This adaptation was also fiendishly good at bringing said best bits to life, so a very deserving mention on the positive side of the list. Coming in at number 7 on Team Fail, Ender's Game. You might completely understandably not be aware that I covered this because it got taken down for copyright reasons a while ago. I may try to fix it or just completely redo it down the line, but here's the cliff notes. This film utterly failed to understand that Ender's Game is as much a story of the psychological damage of being pushed past one's limits as it is a story of a boy tactical genius who gets handed the keys to a space navy. Even said tactics were a huge disappointment. Ender's out-of-the-box thinking that revolutionized every status quo humanity had regarding zero-gravity strategy is reduced down to him using a human meat shield to solve every problem. All in all, a shallow and forgettable film, and the worst performance I've ever seen out of Harrison Ford, who almost looks like he's dying of boredom in every scene. Back to the good, number 6 goes to The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Both the US and Swedish film adaptations of Stieg Larsson's book did a really admirable job of maintaining loyalty to the story while also making sure you got a well-paced and visually pleasing movie. The story is a lot to handle in every version, which I guess is a testament to how well they recreated it. There's some semi-harmless shifting around of which character achieved what, and an unexplained British man, but all in all, a really good adaptation. And number 6 in the red corner, Red. No one is denying that Red was a fun film, and I totally get why it was popular at the time, but as an adaptation, it really doesn't compare to the graphic novel. Like, you literally can't compare them, they have so little in common. It took a very dark, intelligently presented concept about arrogance, fear, trauma, the depths a human can sink to in the right circumstances, and a very real commentary on the scary amounts of power that secretive government agencies have, and devolved it into, lol, look at these old people kicking ass. So yeah, perfectly fine film, really should have been called something else. Looking on the bright side, number 5, The Last Unicorn. A good example of a film that understood the spirit of the book as well as it understood the plot, which isn't super surprising as the author wrote the screenplay, but it's still cool. Loyal to the original to the point of porting over issues that a fresh writer might have taken out. I'm still wondering about those blue potatoes, and it's a shame about the singing, but you can't have everything. The opposing number 5, Ella Enchanted. Again, not a terrible movie, but such a letdown as an adaptation, taking a genuinely clever take on the Cinderella fairy tale that really deconstructed the tropes associated with it and turning it into a generic paint-by-numbers visual comedy. The book is one of the best examples of a story for young people, especially girls, that does not in any way talk down to its reader, and the film just really wanted to be live-action Shrek. I don't begrudge people for liking it, but it just can't hold a candle to the original. Number 4 on the successful side of things, The Godfather. The adaptation that knew exactly what to keep and what to cut out of a very long book in order to stay very true to the story without dragging. Combine that with a talented director and a cast that manages to make book-accurate dialogue sound supernatural, and you have one of the very few examples of a film that surpasses its source material while still respecting it. And its opposite counterpart, Sharpe. I know, a British TV show from the 90s, who cares? I care, damn it! I love these books and they got done dirty. Some of this isn't the showrunner's fault. Cornwell's books were always going to be exceptionally hard to adapt because a huge part of their appeal hinges on the awe-inducing scale of the Napoleonic Wars, and a British TV show was never going to have the budget to recreate that. There was also a big issue with the show going off the air for huge stretches and them losing like 80% of their cast, forcing them to constantly recast or switch book characters into different roles. What is their fault, however, is their insistence on rewriting so much. Motivations become either deeply out of keeping with the time period or just plain nonsensical. Perfectly good book dialogue is replaced with cheesy monologuing. Characters who were decent people in the books become total assholes, and assholes become much nicer for no discernible reason. I really shouldn't have watched the behind-the-scenes features on the DVD box set. It is so hard to listen to these idiot writers patting themselves on the back and thinking they did a great job. Third place on the good list goes to The Shawshank Redemption. Stephen King's non-horror novels seem to consistently have better luck adaptation-wise than his scary books. That is another thing that I could probably do an entire episode on someday if I felt so inclined. The Shawshank Redemption is a film made by people who clearly knew exactly what made the book appealing to people and how to bring that to the screen. I mean, they cover like 20 years of the story and manage not to veer off its plot in any significant way. Book dialogue is lifted right off the page into the script, and most importantly, they captured the feels, man, the feels. The only thing that cost this the number 2 slot is the somewhat understandable inability to resist the urge to change the ending and confirm that the leads are reunited at the end. It's really nice and I love seeing it, but the ambiguity of the book's ending was not an accident, and for better or worse, not sticking to it changes the dynamic of the end of the story. And number 3 on the why did you even bother list, the Percy Jackson movies. The colossal amount of squandered potential involved in these adaptations still makes me sad sometimes. They rewrote the book on how to take good source material and drain everything likable out of it. I hate it all. I hate the dumbing down of Rick Riordan's greater understanding of Greek myths and the culture that created them. I hate that they cast actors that were almost a full decade too old for the roles. I hate that they replaced everything that set Riordan's writing apart from its contemporaries with bog standard movie cliches and bad jokes. And I hate the way they shot themselves in the foot constantly by trying to have their cake and eat it when it comes to being self-contained movies and setting up sequels. I hope that Percy Jackson really does get another shot at the big screen because that lad deserves so much better. Taking the number 2 positive spot is the Hunger Games trilogy. There's not really much to say here besides, wowza, these adaptations are loyal to a fault to the books. If you want an example of films that try to match every message, plot beat, image, and detail of their source material, this trilogy has got to be the forerunner. Of course, that can also lead to some drawbacks, which is exactly what cost it the top spot. Trying to force a book-shaped story into a film-sized whole doesn't always work. For example, when your lead internalizes so much of her emotions she looks like a robot from the outside 90% of the time. Still, an impressive look at what can be done when the filmmakers really want to bring the pages to screen. And coming in a very close second place on the terrible list, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It might surprise you that this isn't at the very top of the list considering my screaming rage during the review. It remains my own personal most hated adaptation of all time, but that is partly because of how much the radio show meant to me, not because the film couldn't have been any worse. However, it still floors me just how consistently this film misses the mark, following the basic structure of the story, but changing and recontextualizing everything until the point of every joke is missed, every theme is lost, and one of the smartest science fictions and social satires ever written is reduced to a slapstick comedy. And in the number 1 spot, the best adaptation I've reviewed so far? Coraline. My goodness, the stars just aligned on this one. A wonderful book, the perfect amount of time between it and the film, a good choice in animation and a talented director, loyalty to the theme of the story and the plot of the book, but an awareness of what needs to be hyped up or toned down for the sake of making it into a cohesive and visually enjoyable film. Coraline the film somehow manages to recreate what I would have sworn was an ineffable charm imbued into Neil Gaiman's book. I wouldn't hesitate for a second to recommend the film to a hardcore fan of the book and vice versa, and there really are a very limited number of adaptations I can say that about. And the worst of the worst, the number 1 bad adaptation I've covered so far? I, Robot. The sheer irony alone of this film earned it the top spot for me. In an almost perfect switch around from the way that everything just works with Coraline, this film is the perfect storm of terrible adaptation-wise. They took the title of a well-respected book and attached it to a film that not only bears no resemblance to its plot, it flies in the face of its core concept. From what I've heard, Asimov was sick of nothing but robot uprising stories, so he introduced 3 very strict rules into his robo-filled world and set himself the challenge of writing a story that would explore everything and anything that could still go wrong while strictly obeying those rules. Any robot-themed story would fit nicely into this, except a violent robot uprising. That is literally the only thing that would be offensively out of keeping with the book. The fact that they didn't originally plan for this to be an adaptation and just slapped on the name for brand recognition at the last minute doesn't make this any less offensive as far as I'm concerned. If you want to tap into the pre-existing fanbase of a famous title, you have a certain amount of responsibility towards respecting that title, and no film has ever failed harder at that than I, Robot. And finally, a quick honourable mention. Who Framed Roger Rabbit could, for many complicated reasons, have been somewhere in the middle of both lists, so I settled for putting it on neither. There is a reason that I had to completely reinvent the way I format my show to make sense of it. Wow, this has actually been a real trip looking back at everything I've covered over the last, 5-6 years? I just want to say how appreciative I am of all of you guys for taking an interest in my silly videos exploring my obsession with film adaptations. Whether you've been watching from the start or just found the channel recently, thank you. I'm really glad you're here. And I'm really excited to keep adding more reviews to the options here. It will be interesting to see if there's a significant difference the next time I make a list like this. Of course, all of this, everything I just described has mostly been my subjective opinion. I would love to hear if you guys would have put things further up or down the list or are surprised that other things didn't make it on. I'll also put links to all of the reviews on the list in the video description in case you haven't seen them and would like to hear the long-form version of my thoughts. Thank you for joining me, my beautiful watchers. Do tune in next time for a return to our regularly scheduled programming, and please don't forget to top up this channel shield against the whims of the YouTube all-powerful algorithm by poking that like button in the eye and sharing this content on the social medias. Take care of yourselves out there. Much love and appreciation to my patrons of honor, Shelby Holtz and Sam Cucinotta. Hello again, my beautiful watchers. I just wanted to take this opportunity to give you a quick reminder that there's a wonderful website called Patreon that's been allowing online producers to actually make a living doing what they do, since apparently YouTube's decided that they shouldn't anymore. Basically, they offer the chance to pledge a certain amount of money per month or per video in exchange for various rewards offered by the creator. There's a variety of stuff you can earn by becoming one of my patrons, including early access to all videos and taking part in that survey you see at the start of every Lost in Adaptation episode. That's actually a very important part of the process, as I use it to gauge how much I'm going to need to explain about the book and the film before I start comparing them. If you decide to become a higher level contributor, your name will be added to the credits that you're seeing right now, and you'll be given the option to join my private chat room so you can regularly talk with me and other patrons. If you're keen enough to join the topmost tier of patronage, you'll earn the most coveted of all the rewards, the chance to pick a future adaptation to be reviewed by yours truly. However, if right now you are thinking, "My goodness, the Dom, I can't do that! The Llama King will not allow it! The Llama King sees all!
The Llama King cannot be opposed! The Llama King is everything!"
Fear not, it would still be a huge help to me if you were to give that like button the old clickaroo, share this episode on social media with perhaps a little recommendation to your friends to check it out, and subscribe if you've not already. It really helps my channel grow and reach new beautiful watchers. I hope you have a most pleasant day, and I will see you in the next episode.